Evening, everyone. Let's start the meeting. Let's do a pledge. All right, so I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. Let me do a quick roll call. Let's see what I got here. I got Molly, Justice, George, Paloma, Dan, Lee. I believe that Ren is at a kindergarten graduation.
Her middle school ceremony.
A middle school ceremony, so she's excused. Obviously, she knows her priorities correctly. The city administrator is here.
And you have Drew Gamels, our county city attorney, and John Clark, our city planner.
Okay, so they're online. And I just note, as always, or at least the last couple of years, we're running our meetings combination both in person and also by electronic means. And then the next thing is just that we have a community segment, and we have some awards to be presented, and I just want to introduce Bonnie Champion, who will handle that. All right, you're on. And I don't know if it's going to be with Ali Muhammad, but I just want to welcome Ali here. It's great to see you. Ali was a former councilman, was a councilman for 2 terms?
Yes, sir.
Yep, absolutely. So great to see you.
Hello, my name is Bonnie Champion,
You're good.
and I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. We have something so exciting. Pete Seeger wanted to recognize Martin Luther King, and so he wanted to have a parade. He called it the Dr. King Parade. And I thought, well, how are we going to get kids to come? Let's have an essay contest. So we've been doing this now. This is our eighth essay contest, and these are the 6 winners. So first, I'd like to thank Mayor Kariakou for having us tonight, and his assistant is Ben. Ben is here someplace, right?
He's the man behind the curtain
Ben
that makes
Swanson.
everything work, sort of like the wizard.
Muhammad Ali, he was Beacon City Councilman for 4 years, and he suggested that we have the presentation here. So we have we'd like to thank the superintendent, Matthew Landau of the Beacon Schools, Mrs. Riley, 3rd grade teacher at JV Forrestal. Is Miss Riley here? Can you raise her hand? And is Mrs. McGinley here? And Mrs. Crystal, the 5th grade teachers at Glenham. And I really want to thank the school secretaries, because they worked very hard to get this all together with me. So we want to thank our supportive parents. It's really exciting. We've been trying to do this over and over since January, and it's been postponed for many reasons. And here you all are, all 6 kids, your parents. Thank you so much. So Kristen Schwartz is from the Rhinebeck Bank, and Rhinebeck Bank has donated $50 to every child for 8 years now. So that's $300 times 8. The Rhinebeck Bank has donated $2,400 for the MLK essay contest. And they do that because they want to add to the quality of life of the people in these communities. I think that's really special. So we have Beacon Sloop Club members here. Constantine Doreen did the certificates and the technical support. Aaron Verdeel is our treasurer. We want to thank our president, Robert May. Patricia Finnerty is taking pictures, and Mary Poppins is taking pictures, and so is Matt Bowen. So the people who read the papers were Susan Berliner, Joe Chernick, Margaret DeHughes, Margaret's here, Vicki Fox, and Gail Moran. We want to thank the Southern Dutchess Coalition President, Jennifer McClinton, and Vice President Charlene Stout. We especially want to thank Pete Seeger, who started this whole thing. So this was his dream, to recognize Martin Luther King. So here we go. We're going to start with our winners. We have Andrew Caparelli. Can you hold this a minute? Yeah. Ready? So come here. Yes, turn around this way.
Take the
Okay,
mic.
here we go. I'm sorry. Ready? Look
Use
at your
the mic.
parents and go ahead. Nice and slow.
Now you're in
Hello,
place.
my name is Andrew Caparelli. I am a fifth grader at Glenham Elementary. It doesn't matter how tall, how small, the color of our skin or hair, diseases or not, we should all be treated equally, just like Martin Luther King Jr. I will use this in my life by never being mean to anyone.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to have you stand right over there. Okay, Nicholas Ferris. Okay, Nicholas, ready? Nice and loud, nice and slow.
My name is Nicholas Ferris Jr. I'm 7 years old at JVF with Miss Riley, my teacher. I think MLK want me to show love. Color is not important, love's important. MLK wanted all about God and love. MLK wants people to all live together. I will do my part and be kind to everyone. Be showing love and respect so we can live in a more peaceful world.
Manasavi Gupta. Okay, ready?
Hello, my name is Manasavi Gupta, and I'm a fifth grader at Glenham Elementary School. I believe that all people should be treated equally because no one has the right to act more superior than the other because they think themselves as different. In my book, no matter the similarities or differences, I try to include everyone. I keep Dr. King's dream alive by treating everyone the way I want to be treated. The golden rule.
Thank you. Weston Hendrick.
My name is Weston Hetrick from Glenham Elementary. I'm in 5th grade. It is our job to be good citizens. Dr. King believed that we should treat people the way that we want to be treated. I try to do this how I treat my teachers, classmates, friends, and teammates. This is how I'm keeping Dr. King's dream alive. It is my dream that by the time I have a family of my own, that discrimination will be a thing from the past.
Landon Soltish.
Hello, my name is Landon Soltish from Glenham Elementary, 5th grade. Martin Luther King tried to make the world a better place, but that's a lot of work. Martin had 6 principles based on nonviolence and love, which guided his life. This man believed that love could conquer all. I can use his principles to become a better person. I can try to make my school a better place by joining the student council. I can make posters for food drives. We can raise money for good causes and to get new playground equipment.
Zaire West.
My name is Zaire West, and I'm from Glenham Elementary School, and I'm in 5th grade. I do not think people today are keeping Dr. King's dream alive. People are still dying. There are riots and protests for equal rights. I plan to help. I talk to everyone. I play with everyone. I don't treat anyone different. I'm kind to everyone. I try to live by Martin Luther King's dream.
So, if we listen to the wisdom from the children, it's amazing what they have to say. I want to congratulate them all, the parents and the teachers and everyone, my friends to be here. Thank you. So we're going to take a picture.
Thanks, buddy. Nice job.
Yeah, sure. I want to shake your hand. You missed that one. Next. That's it. You got to go around. Keep going. That's it. Congratulations. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Well done. Good job. Well done.
Congratulations. Good work.
Sure. Good full. I don't want to steal the shot. There you go. There you go. All right, looking great. Smile all around. Perfect.
Smiling. Are we smiling?
Smile. Got it.
Newspaper. I'm so proud of you. Smile. Cheese, cheese, cheese.
Excellent. Perfect. Yeah.
You're on television.
You're on TV. Thank you so much. Yes. Wonderful job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you. Nice to see you again.
Thank you, Bonnie. Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
So
That was worth waiting.
we'll give it a minute to clear the room. I'm expecting everyone to go home, almost. Take your time, don't worry. You are excused, don't worry. Matt, I hold it against you. I got a strike in the book now. But you can go home. All right, good.
Not tonight.
Thank you.
And Mayor Sergey is here for the first item on the agenda.
Right, Sergey, you can't go. You have to stay.
Give him a minute to clear. We'll never hear.
There was another community segment, which was just an announcement of a July 4th event. I gather we'll get that announcement next week.
We hope so. Yes.
But the traditional reading of the declaration, I believe, is on this year, but we'll know more next week.
Yes, and we'll also be confirming fireworks,
Okay.
which we are working to nail down.
All right. Almost quiet. Everybody can hear all the way in the back. Thomas, you're all the way in the back. Can you hear? I know. Jeff, you can hear us? We're down to the three. Okay. Let's start on our workshop items. The first one is just a discussion of the state's Climate Action Committee and the Climate Action Committee's draft scoping plan. That's Sergey, and you're the CAC chair, so welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and City Council. Can you hear me?
Yeah, but
All right.
keep speaking up.
Okay, Sergey Krasikov, Chair of CAC. Thank you for letting us in on short notice. Okay. So in 2019, New York State passed the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Law known as CLCPA. The law requires economy-wide zero greenhouse emissions mandate by year 2050, encompassing electricity, transportation, building, industry, and agriculture. And unlike net zero or carbon neutral approaches that other states have adopted that include significant flexibility for the polluters, this one requires 85% hard mandate of direct emission reductions across the economy. CLCPA also mandates that 40% of state climate and energy funding to be invested in disproportionately disadvantaged communities, and also contains labor protection measures. And as such, New York State became a leader in United States in adopting this kind of legislation. So while CLCPA establishes firm emission mandates for the states, as well as crucial commitments on equity and environmental justice for the most impacted communities, the law leaves many of particular policies and laws and regulations to be developed to meet these commitments in the hands of public decision-making structure and planning process that encompasses industry, nonprofits, professionals, community members, and it's a 2-year process. As part of it, the law created Climate Action Council, which has 22 members that represent various groups and industries and interests in New York State, and they were tasked with developing a scoping plan, which is basically an outline how these commitments will be reached, industry by industry, year by year, how many cars in which year, how many buildings need to be electrified by which year, so that we, and also establishes funding structures and budget structures to meet these goals. So they have released their scoping plan, a draft scoping plan, and it's now up for discussions. And then once all the comments are collected, the Climate Action Council will finalize and publish a final scoping plan at the beginning of 2023. And once it is adopted, laws and regulations will follow to address each particular goal. And as an example, a law that this council has voted in support of, New York Build Public Renewables Act, is an example of that meat on a kind of bones of a scoping plan. It was pre-finalized scoping plan, but it is part of that process. And as soon as the legislature reintroduces All Electric Buildings Act, which is about setting a benchmark for electrifying all the buildings in New York State, that's something that we will be coming to present to you as well. So the core of the CLCPA is a requirement that the scoping plan identifies measures to reduce greenhouse emissions across the state and co-pollutants that affect disadvantaged communities. And a critical element of this is ensuring compliance timelines by industry sector, both in the scoping plan and in the resulting regulations, to make sure that we reach that level of reductions in greenhouse emissions as needed to meet the obligations set forward by CLCPA. Another important component is a ban on the development and permitting of new fossil fuel power plants and process of retiring existing plants, and the same with the infrastructure, forbidding state funding and forbidding permitting of new gas infrastructure such as pipelines, distribution centers, storage facilities, and a process to retire the existing ones. And a big part of this scoping plan is equity. So this scoping plan lays out roadmap for rapid and equitable reduction of emissions. So they have to reduce equitably between different communities. Can be just Westchester gets theirs very clean, and then Poughkeepsie can stay dirty. It writes it that every community needs to see a reduction on par with other communities. So the deadline for the scoping plan comments is July 1st, and as I mentioned, after that it will be finalized. The natural gas and oil industry has mounted a very coordinated effort to dilute the standards, to shift the timelines, and to shift attention to fake solutions such as biofuels, biomethane, biomass energy, blue hydrogen, and in lesser extent, green hydrogen and waste-to-energy systems such as Poughkeepsie incinerator. I can go in details about each of these, but I can also forward you a packet, a report that looks into each of these proposed solutions by the gas industry, and it's very detailed with a lot of background information and research that went into it. But it's basically a plan to keep the infrastructure, gas infrastructure and gas plants working, just burning different thing, pretending that it's cleaner than natural gas. Sometimes some of these energy solutions are actually dirtier if you follow the whole life cycle from production to processing to burning than just burning pure coal. This transition obviously has costs associated with this in form of incentives to homeowners, to people buying cars, to municipalities to retrofit their buildings, direct spending, research and development, etc. However, the Climate Action Committee has done, with scientists obviously, they did assessments that showed that there will be net benefit of up to $120 billion between 2030 and 2050 if you consider the value of avoided greenhouse emissions and health co-benefits and additional savings from the reduced fuel cost. And they estimate another $50 billion in savings associated with health benefits of active transportation, such as walking and cycling, which is a big component of creating, what we are talking here in Beacon about expanding sidewalks, bike lanes, and making non-motorized transportation or electrified transportation easier. And also energy efficiency interventions in low and moderate income homes. So we're requesting our City Council to support the provisions of the draft scoping plan to guarantee an equitable and expedient transition to a carbon-free economy as stated in the resolution prepared by CAC for the City Council. Not sure if it made your way to all of you, but I passed it to City Administrator and Ben for your consideration, and hopefully at the next City Council meeting you could vote on it and submit your comments or a resolution in support of it prior to the July 1st deadline. I also want to expressly acknowledge the work of CAC member Esther Jackson in preparing the resolution. And
that resolution's in your packet, and we would propose, if you're good with that, we would vote on it next Tuesday, because we don't have a meeting Monday night.
I can also share a draft. It's about 18-page summary of the draft scoping plan that was prepared by the committee, not by our committee, by the Climate Action Council, rather. And it lays out that transition, how they achieve these numbers, what the costs are associated. There is a lot of infographics and data, and it's very easy and enjoyable read because it shows that it's possible, or it looks like it's possible. And I'll happily answer questions if you have any.
I just have one typo before we vote on it. The last whereas has an extra half sentence, now therefore be it. I think there was another one that was fixed, but that one just could be
Yeah, I
corrected.
fixed one of them. I missed that one.
Yes, okay, great, that was it.
Apologize.
But otherwise, I don't have any questions about the substance of it.
And Ben, I hope you got that. It was the last resolved.
Yes,
Got it.
whereas it has, or right before the first now therefore be it, the previous paragraph also has now therefore be it.
Thanks.
There's actually another, in the first be it further resolved, an additional be it further.
Okay, we'll go back through and clean those up for
I'll
next
try
week.
to take a legalese class.
We caught one of them and changed it today.
Yes, I just
Okay.
checked the most updated draft. I think you caught the one Paloma said, but I was trying to
We leave one in just to make sure you have read these, carefully.
Just make sure everybody pays attention.
The bowl of M&Ms.
Sergey, I have a question. When the committee drafts their final recommendations based on all of the feedback they've received, is any additional legislative action required, or can the governor go ahead and implement the findings of the committee? Or do they have, does the Assembly and Senate have to vote on turning those into law?
My understanding that the governor would have to sign it, but the expectation is if the committee adopts, that it will happen.
Okay, thanks.
Cool.
Maybe this is a question more for Chris, actually. Assuming this passes, how does that impact our plans for our city?
Well, you have set a 100% renewable energy requirement for the city that we already are meeting. We've gone back retroactively to do that, so we produce about 70% of our electricity via the solar farm. In the capital program, there's another solar installation we're proposing that notches us up another 4.5%. The rest we buy through renewable energy credits, and we'll do that retroactively. Fortunately, the first year that we did that policy for 2020, our renewable energy credits from the solar farm covered it. So on electricity generation, I think we'll be well ahead of the goals in the state plan. The harder thing are transportation emissions and equipment emissions for things like dump trucks and plows that we don't really have a viable electric alternative yet for. So as we, again, I think we're taking steps to move things like the police department over to hybrids and electrics. We'll be moving that over for small vehicles and small trucks. And as the technologies for batteries improve, hopefully we can get there. So I don't see it affecting us. We're already making decisions that recognize the reality of climate change and its existential threat. The firehouse will be all electric. I would view any future buildings that we do to be electric, efficient, and have some component of renewables.
Maybe this is maybe a question.
It might just put more funding out there for us to implement that. So I would say that's one of the benefits I would see of the state embracing this, giving some incentives so we can make that jump.
Yeah, and I do appreciate that particular point about electric vehicles. That comes up and again in our meetings, that the industry is just behind our goals in terms of being able to implement and investments into that type of technology. And that's addressed here in the resolution. And then I guess my question, maybe back to Sergey, do you think it would be helpful to a little more clearly lay out in the resolution how far ahead the city of Beacon is in some of this work, or is that beside the point?
I think it potentially can add weight to this resolution because we're not just talking the talk, we started walking the walk. And so I think that's a good idea to add a paragraph on current achievements of the city.
Okay, we'll draft something and
I think the thing that we can say is that the City Council adopted a resolution that we would seek to achieve the state goals sooner than the state.
Yes.
Right.
That's a good.
That's easy language, and we're on track to do so. I think would be also easy language, right?
Yeah. So a question about that resolution, because I was about to raise that resolution. I thought that it was about that the city of Beacon, not the government of Beacon, but that the people and everybody that it was not just about the city of Beacon government emissions and use of fossil fuels, but it was about the city.
I don't recall that.
Your resolution was specifically about city operations because we don't control what somebody does in their own house. What you have done is you've adopted the next generation of building codes that are more efficient. You've done things like you participate in a community choice aggregation for electricity. So to the extent that I think we can influence private households, we are also doing that.
I agree. Yeah, and I think what we're doing with water is important too, with the new water meters.
Right, and then deploying electric charging stations so that it's convenient for our visitors, our residents to charge cars easily. we'll put something together that mixes these two ideas.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Sergey.
Thank you.
Spasiba. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Look what's back on the table. So the next item is to discuss accessory dwelling units. Let's see if I can summarize where we were before. So Beacon already permits accessory dwelling units. What the proposal here is to start to make it a little bit easier and a little bit less expensive to do so. We put it on hold for a while because we said we wanted to check to see what impact short-term rental units were having on these. We now have contracting with an entity through the county that's going to give us a clean count of those, and the objective there is to find the ones that can be legal, make sure that they register and become legal, that are short-term rentals, and then identify the ones that are not going to be legal and to make sure that they do not affect our housing stock. We did check the short-term rental law, and what we found, and I'll be honest, I didn't quite remember where we ended up, but the fundamental requirement in the short-term rental law is that the unit that you can rent out has to be the one that you live in. Now, there's some odd definitions about, do you live in it? Do you live in it all the time? But basically, the way that it would affect an accessory dwelling unit is if you are the homeowner and you live in the main home, that's the one that you can do a short-term rental. The accessory dwelling unit is not eligible under the short-term rental law. Do I have that part right? Either Chris or John, who's probably on the phone?
Or Drew.
Or Drew, right?
Not exactly, Mayor. So for short-term rentals, it has to be your primary principal residence in order to rent it, but the accessory dwelling could be eligible. However, under the draft local law that we worked on a couple months ago, and that's back in your packet, we make it very clear that the accessory dwelling cannot be a short-term rental, just to avoid any confusion or any gray aspect of the law.
So you're saying that it wasn't absolutely clear in the short-term rental law?
That's correct.
Okay, but that in the ADU, we would clarify that if you live in the main house, that's the one you can short-term rental. If you live in the ADU, that's the one you can short-term rental, but not the one you don't live in.
Actually, in the accessory dwelling local law, even if you live in that accessory dwelling, that's not subject to Airbnb short-term rentals.
Right. Okay.
Great.
So I was trying to summarize. I didn't quite get it right. And I think our discussion originally, and I'm just trying to recall, so again, I may get pieces of it wrong, that we were talking about whether some accessory dwelling units would have an easier process depending on certain circumstances, and whether others might have a more involved process. And I think my last recollection on that was, for instance, if the footprint of the home doesn't change, the existing home, and the accessory dwelling unit is part of the envelope of the existing home, that would be an easier process than if the accessory dwelling unit were built on the edge of the property, or along the on top of the garage. So I don't think we'd resolved any of that. I think we just have to start up a discussion again, and I think we're going to go through some details. But that's kind of my last recollection. Anyone else want to add where we were last time and what we were working on? Because I don't think I've got 100% memory.
So it was really, so 4 council members weren't on council the last time we talked about it, because I think we wrapped this up in December. And my recollection was that we had gotten through some discussion with John about the changes that we would be making with regards to dimensions, with regards to the zones. We were having some discussion about the different measures that we wanted to take to make things easier for applicants. And I had left off with a question to the city attorney whether we could regulate the cost of the rentals to ensure that they were going to be affordable housing. And the city, Nick came back and said that he affirmed that we can regulate the pricing of the units. And then I think the week later is when we pulled the plug on it.
Okay. And then I think that the state budget also had something here, because I thought the governor's proposal was offering to lend money for renovations of accessory dwelling units, with a stipulation that if someone took the state funding, there would be price requirements on it. And I don't know if that passed or not. And we should, maybe Drew or John, you know the answer to that.
Mayor, I'm not familiar with the exact proposal you're mentioning. I can take a look. I do know at one point in the budget there was a proposal that would mandate municipalities to develop accessory dwellings on all residential properties, regardless of the zoning district. And there were a lot of regulations that went along with that law. That was removed from the budget because it was so controversial, and municipalities really spoke up and expressed the exact reasons why they opposed, and that, you know, regulating accessory dwellings is really a local issue. So the governor had removed that from her budget, and that was not included in the final adopted budget.
And
as far as the funding issue, I'm not so sure, so I will look into that.
Okay. Yeah, if you would. That's the part I wasn't sure about, was the funding component.
It's my understanding that,
John, speak up.
I'm sorry, my camera isn't working. My understanding is that the local law provisions, or the state law provisions, to sort of, as of right, allow accessory dwelling units, was pulled from the budget over the concerns that, home rule concerns primarily. And the $85 million that the governor had sort of set aside as incentives for creation of accessory dwelling units was still in the mix, but didn't get included in the budget, so it would have to be added later. So I think that's still on track, still at least has the governor's blessing, but the New York State ADU law is stuck in committee and probably won't get out of it until after the election, I assume.
John, your voice is a little faint, so I didn't hear everything you said. I don't know if you can try to speak up, but what were you saying about $85 million in the governor's budget?
When the governor decided to pull the plug on including the ADU law in her budget, she did express willingness to continue the $85 million funding as an incentive for the creation of ADUs. So it wouldn't go against home rule, but there would be this incentive program. As I understand it, it wasn't included in the budget, but it still has her blessing and presumably is being reconsidered.
Okay. So I don't think we're going to learn all the answers all at once. I think what we can do maybe in this session is probably start with someone going through what's in it, because as Dan said, we've got new council members, and then start to identify issues that we'll want to work our way through, and then items we want to learn about. So, you know, one of the items we just heard we want to learn about is where's the state at on this in terms of funding, right? Would that work? Because again, I think it's going to take us a couple of rounds to get through this.
Mm-hmm. I think also just because it's new council people, just stating the goals of what we hope to achieve by this, what the intention is by changing this law.
Okay. So could we start with maybe Drew or John just kind of running us through what's in the current draft, knowing that it may not be what we adopt, but just what's there?
Sure. John, you want me to get it started?
Yeah, you can do the law, I'll do the intentions.
Okay. So off the bat, the proposed local law that was worked on, last year, one of the big changes was in the purpose and intent. Previously or currently, you can have accessory apartments on all single-family properties in the residential districts. That was expanded so that it's all existing single-family properties in all residential districts and the transitional district. Transitional district residential properties weren't previously contemplated in the law. We also expanded we did not, let me backtrack, we did not change anything with respect to owner occupancy. So it is still required that the owner of the single-family lot upon which the accessory apartment is located occupy at least one of the dwellings. You can occupy the accessory apartment or the principal dwelling. The location on the lot, that was expanded so that it's located either in or attached to a detached single-family dwelling, meaning you can be within the building footprint or you can be accessory to that and located either a distance away from the principal dwelling or in a detached garage. Apartment size. We made some big changes to this section to modify what the minimum and maximum size for accessory dwellings would be. And this is consistent with what you've seen in other municipalities, just to expand what the minimum and maximum would be. We kept in the exception for buildings constructed prior to August 1st, 1989. We also clarified that you can only have one accessory apartment permitted on a single-family lot. We changed nothing about the exterior appearance. We still want the exterior appearance to match the exterior appearance of the single-family residence. For off-street parking, there is an off-street parking requirement for accessory dwellings. We added discretion for the planning board to waive all the parking requirements when it deems appropriate. A lot of municipalities have gone away with requiring any type of off-street parking for accessory dwellings. So this was a compromise in a way, kind of the middle ground. We added language to clarify that accessory apartments can't be used for short-term rentals. We clarified that an existing structure that does not conform to the yard requirements may still be converted into an accessory apartment without a variance from the Zoning Board of Appeals if the proposed use will not enlarge or increase the dimensional nonconformity.
Can you say that one more time, Drew, about the one you just said?
So and just to clarify what that meant is there were some, Beacon has a lot of small lots that don't necessarily comply with the setback requirements set forth in the code. The idea behind this was that those properties should still be allowed to have an accessory apartment as long as they're not going to enlarge or increase the dimensional nonconformity. And then finally, we added language that would allow the building inspector to have approval authority for accessory apartments entirely contained within the existing single-family dwelling and meeting all the other requirements of the accessory dwelling local law. Right now, an accessory dwelling has to go to the planning board for site plan approval and special use permit approval. This would expedite the process for those accessory apartments that are entirely within the existing single-family dwelling so that they would not need to obtain approval from the planning board. For all accessory dwellings, otherwise, we have removed the requirement for a special permit. So they still have to go to the planning board for site plan, but they wouldn't have to pay the extra expense of a special use permit. It would only require site plan.
Drew, Drew, can I ask you a question? What would trigger a public hearing or involvement with, say, neighbors or public notice of plans?
Yeah, so if it's an accessory apartment, under the proposed local law, if it's an accessory apartment that is outside of the existing home, then it would still go to planning board for site plan, and they'd still have a public hearing, and notice would be issued to neighbors within the required area. So if it's entirely within the home, like the converted, an area of the existing home into a small accessory apartment, then that would just go to the building inspector and would not trigger requirements for a public hearing. But it's only if it's entirely within the footprint of the building.
I'm pretty sure, George, that this is a change we made last fall because we were worried that there wouldn't be any notification.
Yeah.
And that's how that changed.
Yeah, I think it makes sense that if it changes the footprint of any building or any structure on the property, that would trigger community involvement.
And to be clear, that includes a building that already exists that is being converted, that would be outside the footprint of the main
Yes.
home. Got it.
Yes. And then we modified the schedule of dimensional regulations to add a 40% maximum percent building coverage to the R1-5 and T zoning districts, to reduce the required front yard setbacks in all R1 residential districts by 5 feet. Then we also modified the schedule of use regulations so that accessory apartments would be permitted as of right, so no longer requiring special use permit. That does not mean, that still means that some of them would require site plan review, as we previously discussed. And lastly, we modified the schedule of regulations for accessory buildings on residential lots. This modification includes elimination of the maximum cumulative square footage required for accessory buildings, increasing the maximum square footage permitted for each accessory building constructed in connection with a single-family dwelling, and then increasing the maximum square footage permitted for each accessory building also constructed with a single-family home. And this just gives more leeway for developing these accessory buildings. The codes is pretty restrictive currently, so this will allow for more development of these accessory apartments. There's not very many in the city right now, and it is looked at as, you know, these are usually generally smaller apartments. They're generally more affordable because of their size. Having accessory apartments in your community generally increases housing stock, so there's a lot of benefits, but Beacon currently doesn't have a lot, and part of the concern is maybe because you have the site plan and special use permit required for every single accessory dwelling, it might be restrictive.
And one of the reasons to not require everyone to go through the special use permit process is because when you go to the planning board, you're also paying our lawyers to be there to listen. You're paying the city planner. If there's any kind of drainage issue, the city engineer. So like at a minimum, you're around $400 an hour for every hour that this is before the planning board, and at a maximum, it's between $500 and $600. So what I've seen in my brief tenure here is we've only had 2, I think, go through, and they end up costing the owners $4,000 or $5,000 just in the approval process before you get to spending any money on modifications to your home. My other understanding is that both of those were for family members. They're typically, you know, you have an older parent or an in-law who needs to live somewhat independently but be close, or needs that affordability. And the other circumstance that they've seen a lot of is you have you know, a sibling or someone, a son or daughter in your family who may need a kind of supportive housing, but with a wall in their own space to live in. So speaking about the goals, one of the goals was to try to take that upfront cost off, because it's still going to cost tens of thousands of dollars to move walls, fix entrances, and you know, we've not seen many people try to do this, and most of them, again, are families trying to figure out how they accommodate somebody in their home that needs, you know, a small apartment but wants their own space.
Yeah, by chance, I ran into the homeowner at the Strawberry Festival who's going through the process right now, and I met his mother. And that's who the accessory dwelling unit is for. I think the other one that went through in the last year, I think, was a neighbor of mine, and it was the same situation. It was for the mother of one of the 2 parents. So I think it's a pretty normal circumstance. And I think that the reason this is in all the literature on how to address housing issues, and most recently in the President did a task force on housing, and it was also included in that, is because it's one of the lowest cost ways of increasing the number of units in a community. So I just want to add that.
And you also had that, I know Ren would speak to this if she was here, but when Dutchess County did their housing report, they talked about even if you're not creating a specific unit that's affordable, you're creating housing so that people looking for that type of housing don't end up cornering the market on apartments that are less. So we have seen that people looking for apartments that might be considered a market rate are taking up other apartments because there's not enough of those. So again, it's not a panacea in any way, but a lot of the more forward-thinking cities are looking to do this as one way of opening up new units, and then it also helps on the affordability for people who own a place, because even if you're getting some rent for, the attic, the basement, the garage, it can help you pay a mortgage, help you pay the costs.
If I could make 2 points additionally. Somewhere over 75% of the city of Beacon is zoned for single-family housing, meaning there's no multifamily apartments allowed other than accessory dwelling units, which have been allowed since 1989, but with pretty strict provisions which act as a pretty strong disincentive against them. Single-family housing nationally, and I don't want to say anything about Beacon because I don't know about the history of how it's been implemented before I came here, but it's been routinely, single-family housing has been routinely designed to exclude lower-income people from middle and upper-class neighborhoods. It's an exclusionary policy. And if you have over 75% of your city that is exclusionary in its provisions, it seems to me, the city should really look, if you think that there's a real demand or a need for affordable housing, this is one of the ways you can do it without major changes in neighborhood or major changes in quality of life. You can do it incrementally, it's low cost, it's privately done rather than through public subsidies. It's a good way to provide smaller units that match housing sizes, current sort of housing sizes. And that's the second point I would make, is that the average household size all across the country, and especially in Beacon, is going down because people are having fewer and fewer children. There's more and more single and two-family households than there ever was before. If you go back to, say, 1940s, 43% of the housing was married with children. Now it's down to 20%. Our households are married with children. One-person households started out in 1940 is 8%, and now it's up to 28%. In Beacon, the average size of each household, persons per household, has gone down 12.5% in the last 20 years. So there's, in essence, that single-family neighborhoods that you've created through your zoning is getting less and less populated. And so the accessory dwelling units are a way to sort of repopulate that and allow for that sort of more vibrancy in those neighborhoods where older people who are holding on to their homes can take advantage of their yard to create some income and to have some sort of replenishment of the population in those neighborhoods. And so it's not actually overloading neighborhoods, it's trying to replenish neighborhoods, I would say that. And in terms of sort of recent track record, according to the building department, since 1989, there's 29 accessory dwelling units in the city of Beacon. It's not very many. Since I've been here in the last 6 years, there's been 9 applications. The first 3 were before the zoning law was changed to eliminate special permits from the city council instead of the planning board. And the average time to get through the process when the city council had special permit authority was 8 months. By moving it to the planning board, it's reduced it to 4 months. But that's still a high number of months. If a project is compliant with the zoning inside a house where no one will be able to see any new construction, having it administratively controlled seems to make a lot of sense to me in order to make these things happen.
Thanks, John. Yeah, and I just offer a little history. You know, the city adopted the in-law apartment concept, or what's now called the accessory dwelling unit, in, as John said, in the 90s, and that was because all of the homes from basically Wolcott to Verplank on either side of Main Street and from the river up the hill were not single-family neighborhoods. They were, well, the ones that were single-family were zoned to permit conversion to multifamily in all of the neighborhoods at all places. And so one of the things that the council in the 90s did was, in rethinking how does the one stabilize and move the community forward, one of the concepts was to eliminate the ability to convert single-family homes to multifamily. There was a great deal of opposition to that because the local folks, local builders were doing those conversions. The concept of allowing an in-law apartment was a response to that, and said that if the owner lived in the unit, that the owner could have an accessory unit. It was designed to help, you know, seniors who were still in their homes and didn't want to move out to be able to kind of afford that home. There were requirements, as John said, that were stringent because at the time we were trying to avoid ongoing conversions. And so it said not only did you have to live in it, but there was every 2 years was an inspection requirement. And so, you know, that made sense at the time. Those are harder, and it was a special use permit as well to kind of make it, again, sure that nobody was using it to build multifamily in the single-family neighborhoods. So that's sort of the backdrop of why it was made harder. I think we're talking about the right things to simplify. The one thing I wanted to ask, I think where we got to on hearing and notice, which is, you know, if it alters the footprint of the home, it triggers a hearing. Is there a way that we could avoid sort of professional site plan? Or is there a way we could make that a little bit less expensive for people, but still require the hearing, still require some sort of site plan, but not make it be as expensive? Just wondering.
Can I just add, so that question, so if, what would be submitted then for,
I don't know.
for drawings?
Yeah,
Because,
I don't know, I'm exploring, right?
okay, all right.
Yeah.
Because there would have to be some kind of things for the builders.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm just kind of looking, is there some way that we can make the cost less, but still have a hearing, still have people be able to react to what's this going to look like, right? And I don't know the answer. The answer might be no.
Right.
Well, one option could be to adopt a special site plan fee for accessory dwellings, so that they're not paying the same as, say, construction of an office space or, a two-family residential home, something like that. So that's one option. Taking it completely out of site plan and establishing a unique permit procedure just for accessory dwellings. It's a little more tricky. We'd have to consider what materials you'd want to submit, and if that would be different than what's submitted for a site plan. So we'd have to think about it, but there's a couple options.
Yeah, so Dan, you made a good point, which is you got to build to something. You got to have some kind of drawings, right?
Right.
So Drew, what you suggested was not that the homeowner wouldn't have to have plans that could be presented, but that we would fix a fee above and just put a limit on it. And basically
Right,
use.
that would be an option.
Yeah, okay.
So that's to reduce the fees?
Yeah, to put a cap on it of some kind, right?
Yeah, so when we have a fee, presumably the fee is covering some kind of city expense, right? Some kind of clerical work. And that's why, when I got a chicken coop, I had to pay $15, presumably because someone needed to come and inspect the chicken coop and we were covering their time. So if we are not, if we're reducing fees, does that mean that we're not adequately covering the costs of whatever work we do on the planning side in Beacon or the building department in Beacon, that we're now doing that work for free, or we're kind of subsidizing? Or I guess the question is, do our fees accurately reflect the costs that they are covering.
Yeah, well, the $15 doesn't, you got a deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did get a deal. That didn't cover the phone call.
I will.
I never
will-
got my certificate, by the way, so maybe that's why.
Yeah, the one that I personally dealt with, I didn't do a chicken coop. We had an underground oil tank that we needed to decommission, and it was a $150 fee. And you needed to hire a professional. The professional had to be licensed, and all the building department did was come, take a look, and walk away. And my argument at the time was, if you set the fees too high, you're going to encourage people not to get it inspected, which would be far worse, right? But that's not addressing your question. I don't know, we need to look, we can get some budget numbers, but the building department makes a lot of money, and it's making it mostly on the larger developments. And so I'm willing to subsidize smaller ones to encourage behavior.
Well, and
Let's talk
Mayor, if
about-
I may, it might not even be so much of a subsidy. You know, accessory dwellings are usually a little bit more simple and don't necessarily take as much time to review as the other projects that the city's looking at. So, you know, we'd have to consult with the building department to see how they feel and what their review time really is. But in theory, you could impose a smaller reduced fee for accessory dwellings on the lines of these are a little bit more straightforward and take shorter time to review at the building department level.
I mean, the argument that we've heard is you're treating, you know, a small homeowner who wants to build a small apartment for their in-law the same way you are a large developer. You're saying, go get an engineer and have an engineering plan. And, you know, you're putting them through a special use permit in which they're on the agenda. They have to notice, which there's a cost to notice and a cost to the public hearing that's borne by them, and there's the professional reviews. So, Drew, can we also look at maybe if you're just doing minor things on the property, like you're converting the barn but you're not changing footprints, does that have to be a stamped engineering drawing, or could that be a drawing like we would accept for a fence or for something less major?
Well,
Maybe
it would
a
still
deck.
require it would still require a building permit. So you'd need to submit the necessary materials for the building permit. And I believe regardless, that would require stamped engineered plans just for the building permit. So you're not doing anything, you know, different either way. Even for those that are completely within the building footprint, they're going to have to get plans that'll have to be submitted to the building department.
Okay. Yeah, we're just trying to recognize that a small household is not the equivalent of a 200-unit apartment building.
I mean, I just don't want to paint this as that the only people that are going to be doing ADUs are existing homeowners who are adding an ADU to the back of their house for a family member or what have you. The likely outcome is that every new construction, or a high percentage of the new construction, will often include an ADU because of what we're doing here today, which means maybe everybody's okay with that because it's achieving the aims, but I just don't think it's always going to be a family putting this in the backyard. It could be very likely developers always building with an ADU in the back to maximize their profit.
Would they be able to do that? Because the developer is not the owner, so he can't get it approved.
Yeah, I mean, I was about to say maybe we could tweak the law so that that wouldn't be an owner-occupied unit, right? You'd basically be building a two-family.
Well, let me tell you where I'd be going, which is I wouldn't build any more single-family homes in Beacon, right? One, there's not much property left. And
Right.
two, what we know is that's the worst of the land uses that we could approve. And as John said, you know, single-family zoning has been how we got into this situation of not having enough housing in urban areas. So I like the concept of saying, if we do build any, I'm okay with that, but I don't think we've got a lot of single-family.
I don't think you have a lot of tracts of land that are available for single-family. There's a couple small neighborhoods like the old Knights of Columbus property, and maybe there's like...
There's a lot of subdivision still going on, right?
Yeah, there are two on the block I used to live on.
Yeah, there's two
Yeah, but I
on my
mean, like,
block.
we're talking about a couple homes as
Yeah.
opposed to like what you see out in other parts of the county where it's like 100 houses, you know, so it is a small number that are, You're basically doing infill development at this point. You're almost built out.
The only significant R1 that we've got that's undeveloped is the Camp Beacon area is actually R1. I'm sorry, the Camp Beacon area is single family. I don't expect us to build single family there. And then the Country Club Golf Course is R1. And again, I'd be more than happy to look at ways of ensuring that it's, that something is built, not necessarily less dense, but maybe more dense, or at least as dense, and then consolidated.
With the conservation subdivision.
Yeah, right.
That requires open space to be preserved.
Yeah.
Forgetting about this, I did this number, it's been a while, but I think it was around 10 subdivisions a year, single-family lots. So it's not a lot. The planning board does not see a lot of new construction in single-family houses. It's one here, one there, subdivision here, subdivision there. It's usually about 10 or maybe 12 a year, one a month at most.
Right,
So you're not going to get a big overwhelming number of new, and there has been no, new construction that includes this. There's been one out of the 9 that included an accessory apartment within the building. So you would not know it's there, but it was inside the building originally designed such. So.
And again, we're not trying to resolve everything. We're just trying to get issues on the table and remind ourselves what we had talked about the last time. Is there other stuff?
There is. John did some good drawings that helped us visualize what some of these different different, like the R15 and R17.5, like he showed us what it would look like and what's possible and how these setbacks work. That would be helpful to bring that back, especially for the new council, but also to refresh my memory, because there was a couple things that looked a little crowded to me that I was concerned about.
Yeah, John, that would be great. And the other thing that reminds me is you had asked us to change a percentage of like how much of the footprint of the property could be constructed of the main house or something. Maybe you could help us recall that as well when you bring the drawings forward?
Yes, there's some convoluted laws in the accessory buildings table that accessory apartments always run up against, or often run up against, and require variances over. There was just one on North Walnut Street that came in in the R5 district. It was a 6,500 square foot lot, but it had a 2-car garage on it. It actually had a 3-car garage. They knocked it down to a 2-car garage so that they could fit the accessory building on. And they were over the limit in terms of cumulative accessory buildings, even though they were within the range of building coverage on the lot. So they had to go to get a variance, which added a couple months to their process. So that's the sort of thing that we're trying to avoid in this new law, is to make the coverage requirements and the square footage requirements simple, straightforward, and only 1 or 2 that you have to meet, so that you don't run across 6 different numbers you have to match, and you can make 5 of them, but you can't make that other one, so you have to waste a couple months going to the ZBA for their approval.
All right, so yeah, I do remember some of those drawings. I don't even think you have to do new ones. I think you just have to resurrect the ones you've got. So let's
we can put it on for the workshop on the 27th and have John lined up.
One thing we should do. We said we wanted to learn whether the state was doing any sort of lending programs to support this. Other things and other ideas we might want to start putting on the table?
Yeah, just Dan's idea about putting a rental requirement on these units. I don't know if, it sounds like you brought it up with Nick, and he said that it was legally allowed. So Drew, I don't know, just kind of understanding more what our parameters are. I'm not saying we as a majority definitely want to do that, but just understanding how that might work would be useful as well.
If you'd like, specifically the question I asked was whether we could regulate the rent prices at a certain percentage of AMI, and Nick came back the next meeting and said, yes, we could. So we would have to have a discussion about what we wanted to do, but it's within our right to do it.
Well, and then you'd also have to think about your enforcement. I'm back to where I am with STRs, which is you can pass any law, but there are mechanisms that aren't in place to enforce it. I have no mechanisms in place to do rent. They could come to the planning board and say, hey, this is rented, and then pay a higher rent, and I don't know how I ever figure that out.
If I'm renting out a unit in my home or in an ADU, don't I have to register with the city?
You do, but we don't check your income. We don't check what the contract is between you and the property owner.
Hudson River Housing does it in the big buildings, right?
Hudson River Housing does it for your inclusionary zoning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Over 10 units.
But they also take a fee. So like, again, if the goal is to make the development of ADUs, if we can agree that ADUs are beneficial in providing some level of housing that's underrepresented in the community, then making it cheaper, if you go that route, somebody's got to administer a rent control and keep an eye on it. And so when Hudson River Housing does our inclusionary zoning, there's a fee that they bank for doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And it would, I mean, you might as well not do the law if you're going to make them pay a fee to, because you've just probably spent more than if they went to the planning board.
Right. I think, so a lot of stuff is bubbling up from our conversation last year. So my objectives with this law are not just to make ADUs easier with the hope that they will be affordable. In fact, I think it's most likely that if they're unregulated, that they'll just go for market rate based on their size. Jody Macredo looked up something that was 1,700 square feet, and it was $1,700 was something that was like we were talking about dimensions. I don't remember the exact numbers, but there was something that was maybe like 800 square feet, and it came out to $1,700 when she looked it up. So, if I were someone who was building an ADU, I would probably want to get as much money as possible, so I would go at market rate. So I don't think that there's any downward pressure. Other than people who are building them for family members, I don't think there's any downward pressure to ensure that these are going to be any more affordable than others. And I don't think supply and demand is working so hot in Beacon the last few years. So I don't think we can just depend on supply and demand to lower the rates.
But Dan, if you look what's being built, like Ferry Landing, those are 2 bedrooms that are selling for almost $1 million a piece. So like $1,700 a month may not be affordable for somebody at 30% of AMI, but it could be affordable to somebody at 80, 90, 100, 110% of AMI. These are smaller apartments, and I have personal experience with it. When my grandmother lost her housing back in the late 1980s, she moved to an accessory unit in Cold Spring, and it was a small unit, and again, I'm sure they were charging market, but it was something that somebody on a fixed income could afford because it was simply a piece of somebody's house. It was small. So again, offering opportunities at all income levels can help to mitigate some of the increases in the price of rent, because somebody who would rent a $1,700 apartment may not be able to find that, and then they're going for other apartments that other people can't get.
Well, that's what our county study is showing, right? Because it's showing a gap at the higher end of housing, which is interesting, as well as at sort of the more moderate end. And what that means is, as sort of Chris suggested, that people who can afford more are taking the smaller units and bidding up price in that middle range, so that as you add units, you actually can relieve some pressure, even if they're not at the lowest end, just by simply getting people who can afford more to kind of stick with the bigger ones, so the middle ones come in at more affordable rates.
I know in my town, like when I moved to New Paltz in my early 30s when I had no money, and a lot of my friends had no money, we had an ADU law there, and they ended up living in smaller apartments that were part of larger houses. They never would have been able to afford the larger house, and oftentimes they got a better deal because they're dealing with a small landlord as opposed to the large apartments who are clearly going to be at market. They know the market. The smaller landlords often are like, seem open to renting to people that not at the top notch if they know they're going to have a neighbor that they can live with, and that maybe even would help around the property, which I know one of my friends did. He said, I'll cut the lawn, and he got a deal. So again, I think the goal is about diversity of housing, too. A lot of these units are the only units that have been adapted for people with disabilities. Like, if you think about how hard it is for some of us to rent a place, and then you think about somebody who's not ambulatory, and they need to get through certain with doorways, and they need to have bathroom accommodations, it just doesn't exist. And a lot of these units are being developed, that we've seen so far, are being developed for older people, and they do have the things like the grab bars and the wider doors.
Should we go back to George's initial question about what each of our goals are in considering this?
Can I just raise one more issue before we go to that? So I have questions about doing away with inspections. If an apartment, if an ADU is rented out, and they've registered that rental with the city, that would have to be inspected every 2 years anyway, right?
Three, I think.
Every 3, okay.
Yeah, I think the accessory units were more frequent.
Okay, so removing this renewal inspection does not mean that an inspection won't happen. It'll just only happen when it's being rented. But if, like, say I built an ADU and my mother moved in and I wasn't charging her rent, then it wouldn't be inspected, correct? Every 3 years?
Drew?
It's an interesting
Correct,
question.
because it wouldn't be a rental unit.
Say again?
Yeah, you are correct, Dan, and as soon as you start renting it out, then you have to register it, and you'd be subject to our rental
Okay.
registration.
All right, I just wanted to make sure that this, cutting out Section G meant that people were going to be living in uninspected housing.
And it was really for, that special use permit renewal, so if you remove the special use permit requirement, then you're removing this additional inspection requirement, and then you'd be just complying with the rental registration if it was a rental unit.
Thank you. Sorry, Paloma. Just get that out.
So let me suggest the following. Why don't we all kind of consider it and pick up that issue first, or you want to keep going? Or do you want to kind of give us some time to kind of think through stuff?
I mean, I'll say briefly that I'm generally in support of creating more density in the city, whether that's through ADUs or through adjusting our zoning. But my underlying interest is in creating more affordable housing. I don't know that doing that through ADUs is particularly effective. I think that there are a lot of other things that we can be doing that we have discussed doing that are on the agenda to be more effective in that. And I absolutely agree with Chris that anything we do has to be enforceable, and we need to be thinking through that too.
Okay.
Those are my broad thoughts.
We want to keep going, or I'm just trying to figure out how much more time we want to spend. What do all people think? Because we know we have to pick it up again.
Mm-hmm.
I started moving in the direction of trying to define what are the bits we're going to pick up. But again, I'm not trying to alter the conversation if you want to keep going.
I think I would be inclined to rest on this and pick it up at another date.
We can queue it up for the 27th with, I heard you want the drawings that John had put and the dimensions, and then we'll try to, Drew, figure out the status of the state lending programs.
Absolutely.
And then about what you're thinking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's all right?
For the goals.
Is there any other communities that have recently done something along these lines and that we can look to for impacts, like a year or two ago?
We'll look at that. I know I've seen proposals, like I look at stuff that they're doing in Seattle and San Francisco, where they have chronic housing shortages and where neighborhoods have been zoned the same way for a long time, and there's this increasing pressure to densify, but their zoning doesn't allow it, and they'll never get to affordability without adding more density.
Right.
So we'll find a couple. I know that Albany at one point did this, right, Drew?
Yes, and there's been a couple other New York State municipalities. I think Albany actually did it like a couple years now, but this is a hot topic, and municipalities are continuously updating their accessory dwelling local laws. Now, I don't know what the impact, exactly what language has been proposed and adopted and what the impacts are, but I can do a search for New York
Yeah,
specifically.
we'll put together a briefing on that.
That would
I
be
think.
interesting.
Yeah, and I don't think any one of us here are under the
Oh,
illusion
John?
that this is going to solve everything.
Yeah.
It's just one of many tools in the toolbox, I think, that we're looking for.
I'm sorry, John, do you had something to add?
Yeah, the city of Kingston is going through a major zoning rewrite right now, and I looked it up briefly yesterday, and they're allowing ADUs by right with very limited requirements.
So maybe, I think what people are saying is maybe we could do a more of a look, and that would be one of the items to report back on, right? Which
We
is
got
what
it.
else do we see out there?
Okay.
Yeah, and as John, as George was saying, it's, one of the items in the toolbox, it's the only item that affects single-family zoning, right? And we just, that's sort of one of the issues that we've got, is we've got a lot of single-family zoning in town, so. Okay, is that all right, everyone? Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. That was a good discussion, and it was at the right level, which is we're not ready to adopt a law, we're just kind of starting up a conversation again. It's going to take a couple of rounds. Okay. Okay, next one is discussion of the community investment program. And that's
So I'm gonna,
Drew and Chris.
Yeah, Drew is going to lead this off. Where we left this for people tuning in, this is the $20,000 that was put in the budget last year to do mini community organization grants. We had gone through a scoring process where you had all opined in on what should be funded, but then Nick realized some of these things may not be allowable. So in your packet, you have an update of if you look at the summary, I'm sorry, not the summary. If you look at the review of the applicants, they've gone through, and the short answer, there's a couple of them that we can't fund, and the rest we can fund as long as we do a contract. And Drew, could you just walk us through your thinking on this as you and Nick developed this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm not on mute, right? Yeah. So we put together this chart to evaluate each of the applicants and their proposals. We found that only two really aren't connected enough to an acceptable public purpose. And we've highlighted those in gray just to make the city council more aware of them. For everything else, we really were able to conclude that there was a public purpose for at least an aspect of the project, if not for the whole project. And moving forward, what would need to be done is a contract so that you're specifying that public purpose, that the city is giving this money and this is the public purpose. And, that contract makes it valid and that it's not considered a gift of public funds. So we've really highlighted, most of these are connected to activities for children or activities for seniors or promoting the arts and the culture in the city of Beacon, and those are really acceptable municipal purposes, and they're supported by general municipal law or city law, and that's what we were basing our analysis of as we read each and every proposal.
So just to not have this maybe be more difficult than it need to be, if you want to go with your recommended funding amounts, the only changes you need to do are to reallocate $2,000 that you had suggested for Common Ground Farm and reallocate $1,500 to Beacon Youth Football, from Beacon Youth Football. Those are the two that were disallowed. So if you want to shift that $3,500 to one or more of the other applicants, I would encourage to do one that you're already going to fund, because each of these is going to require a contract. So if...
I'm good with that.
Yeah, that was one of my questions.
we-
I know we initially said 4, but I recognize there's a lot of overhead here, and so I don't know if 6 is even feasible for the city to administer.
Yeah, it's a lot. Like, we did this with the UDAG grants last year, where we did facade funding and not-for-profits. We ended up with 10 contracts, and I'm still working through the contracts to close some of them out. So if we could ideally get, I mean, if you reallocate, we're at 4, I think that's doable, and I think Drew and I could work out cursory contracts that would meet the needs of the state law. And again, I'm open to any proposal you have to shift it. I think again, however you want to reallocate that.
Could we just take that 3,500 and spread it equitably between the 4?
Yes.
So question though, it was the foundation for Beacon Schools, was that grant very specific to something that had already happened, or no, it would still?
Already happened? I
Yeah.
don't think so.
No, I think it's coming up.
Great.
And Cornell Cooperative has reached out to us because they're hiring staff and they wanted to understand if we were going to do that. So we had originally, I think, funded them at 10,000. 8,000 is still sufficient for us to get a good, like another position open for a Beacon resident. And again, if you want to move it around, we could put just about $900 in each one and $800 in another, and that way it's just
I think that would be the
easy.
easiest.
I'm fine with that.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
I'm fine with
And
that.
can I maybe suggest in the future, we kind of set a minimum if we're going to have to do contracts and such? Like 5,000 or something like that.
You mean a minimum
That we would
request.
award.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it means, we might be picking fewer, but it would be, more sizable amounts, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I also want to recommend, sorry. I also want to recommend that, that next year, since we established these 3 criteria, and Keenan Bean has weighed in on some of the other criteria, the legal criteria, that perhaps next year we hand this criteria off to a capable committee, maybe the reconstituted Recreation Committee, and the City Council does not have any say. And I mean, we approve, but I don't want to be the selection committee. I don't think it doesn't seem right, and I'm being lobbied by the applicants, and I'd rather have like someone impartial just looking at the criteria. Yeah.
I would be more interested potentially in a limit on the number of contracts as opposed to the amount in each contract, but I'm also very happy to pass that decision off to a committee. And would also just note that now that we have these criteria and these additional parameters, to make that really explicit in the application next time around now that we all know all these requirements.
And I would just, I know there's some things on here that you're concerned that are going wanting for funding. Lee and I had a conversation with a state senator on Friday who we know has put money into Fairground and I Am Beacon. So 2 of those applicants are going to be getting a member item from the state senate. I also met with Beacon Youth Football, and I think we can help them because the building that they're renovating that we own needs certain things in it, and we can find that in other budgets. So we will, and then Common Ground Farm, you may know, runs our farmers market, and we've given them a very generous deal. We never raised the fee on that, and their market's doing extraordinarily well. We have gotten some largesse around to these other organizations too to support them.
Yep, and Chris and I made a point of advocating for a couple of these. So, the other thing is, I think where our rec committee is going is into the broader community services and recreation, and so I think this would actually be a very good thing to do. I think we'd have to put some, ground rules in place that, if you're on the rec committee and you're on one of these groups, got to recuse yourself. Well, we could sort all that out, right? And I think it's a good way because it will encourage participation in the rec and community services committee.
But this was the right process, so you could see like where the pitfalls are and figure out a way through them, and now we can hand it off to a committee because you've developed a lot of work. And you all did a great job on the scoring, and Paloma, you did a great job setting that up.
Thanks. I don't know if I'm allowed to ask this question, but did a certain state senator mention funding as well for Cornell Cooperative Extension and NAMI Mid-Hudson and Mutual Aid Beacon?
I don't recall that he did. Do you? The two that I recall are Fairground and I Am Beacon.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can check. We'll let you know. But yeah, we want to also be cautious about not providing double funding, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we'll check that.
Okay, and then move on. It's okay. So this one is authorizing the city administrator to execute agreement with Tim Dexter for consulting services for Tompkins House renovation project. So you want to tell us about that, and then I'll add a little bit?
Sure. So some months ago, we did a presentation by our architect, Bob Mitchell, who's working on the consolidated fire station at Tompkins Hose. We are in the design process now because you authorized that design contract. I don't have the skills or the expertise to know a fire station and what it needs, or to be at that detailed level of construction to know, that the materials we're getting and the installations they're doing are to code and they're to the plan. So I really wanted to hire somebody that could be our advocate with both the architect and the eventual contractor. I'd like to bring Tim Dexter on, who has served the city in many roles. He was one of our first career firefighters. He was a fire lieutenant, deputy building inspector, and then he actually did 2 stints as the acting administrator. What I'm proposing is a contract relationship like we have with our city engineer or city planner, $75 an hour. He will participate in construction meetings. If things go well, I would parlay that into an extension next year where he helps to be essentially the clerk of the works on the job. So I know that when the concrete comes in, somebody's actually tested it for to make sure it's the correct PSI. We make sure that what's on plan is what we're buying. When I've done other projects in the past, this construction inspector role is really important. So I thought that Tim is really knowledgeable about the fire service. He's really knowledgeable about building code, and I thought those two combined would be great. I also do want to let you know our fire chief recently retired and has been doing less hours. We'll be advertising for a new fire chief, so I don't have that on my team right now. You may have also heard our building inspector is retiring in September, so I'm not going to have the current building inspector on either. So I needed kind of the mix of both of those skills.
There's no one else in the city government that can do this work?
The next closest one would be your former superintendent of streets, Anthony Tomaselli, but I'm actually using him on the Fishkill Avenue, Teller Avenue project on the Hannah Lane, Fishkill Avenue sewer project. So that's been a kind of long-standing practice in the city that the former superintendent of streets would often be like a clerk of the works on road, sidewalk, and sometimes sewer and water projects. We thought about using him on the dam, but on that, because that's such specialty work, I insisted that we have an outside firm do that.
And
I'm just trying to figure out what team I need to assemble to make sure that we do the job well. And I do have a lot of confidence in Tim. He was here when I was on council. Again, I know he has his critics, but this is a narrow scope of work that I think he nails down.
So let me just add a couple of things, because there's some misconceptions out there. There was one person in the city that was getting paid once for doing 2 jobs, which was the combination building inspector and fire lieutenant. And that was Tim, and he had this unusual capability of doing both, since he was fully able to do interior fires. And he was the only officer that was a career officer, because it was during the period that we used volunteer chiefs. And so you actually needed somebody, an adult in the room once in a while. And he was also the building department head. Chris mentioned that he was around when we were both on council. That was a very difficult period. As you heard, we eliminated the right to convert single-family homes to multifamily at that time. There were about 170 illegal conversions that were found by Tim Dexter, and he chased every single one. So, also at the time, there were basically 2 department heads that I could trust to give me straight answers. The one was some guy named Randy Casal, who ran the highway department, and the other one was Tim. And Tim had the added trait of someone you trust with your life. So if you're in a fire, he's going to go in and pull you out. So that's sort of the background. It was Mayor Gould who suggested that we do some sort of joint job. The pay might have been a little bit higher, but I don't think it was. And then the year that Tim retired, we had to add a staff, right? Because we had to replace the building department with Dave, and then we had to add another full-time firefighter to fill that slot as well. Okay. So just to be clear on what that role was about.
And to Dan's point, I didn't advertise it. I didn't put it out. I knew Tim knew this project and was part of the consolidation study too. And typically when I have somebody like that, like Zepp, Anthony Tomaselli, he knows the roads so in and out, and he's been like he actually walked it with the engineer and kind of gave the engineer information she didn't have on the plans, and that there's a value to that information if the person is good, and I believe that both of the people I've talked about using are very, very competent and trustworthy.
I'd like to see a scope of work, like a job description, and an estimate of hours, if we can, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Chris, what would be your response with people that might say, well, isn't that what the building department does?
The building department more is to do regulation of new development. They're not there to be a construction inspector. They can do one inspection to make sure, for instance, you've used a licensed plumber and everything looks good. This is well beyond that. This is somebody who's coordinating on a daily basis with, once we get into construction, on a daily basis with the architect and the contractor and the various primes. When we bid this is under WIC's laws, so you're going to have 5 different contractors. We actually have to bid out the plumbing, the HVAC, the site work, the carpentry, and geez, one other thing. Electrical, thank you. And those, there's a lot of coordination going on. I did a project that was about 2.5 times the size of this fire facility, and I was amazed to learn how much coordination you needed to do between the different trades to make sure work is happening at the same time. And then oftentimes they'll blame each other for things that go wrong, and I need a professional to tell me, no, it was the electrician that...
Right, so essentially he's going to be in charge of sequencing. He's almost like the contractor, the general contractor, overseeing all the subcontractors and integrating all of them into the
I would be more
sequence.
comfortable using the term clerk of the works.
Clerk of the works, yes.
Yes.
But
So he'll review, when you do these jobs, you have to review the pay apps and make sure that when the companies are submitting for certain things, that the quantities were provided, the quality was provided, and then hold them accountable if it wasn't. So he's kind of a conduit between the city, the architect, and the contractors.
With the interest of the city at heart, so he's looking out for our interests constantly
Yes,
on site.
and he's already joined me on meetings about, we're in the investigation phase of the project, so we're doing hazardous materials investigations inside and outside the building. We've done geotechnical boring, so we're laying out where those go. We're updating the survey, and then we also had somebody come in and shoot the dimensions of the building inside. And Tim Tim is interested in this because he's been shepherding the consolidation along all these years, and so he helped me on that gratis. But I do want to get that into a more formalized contract.
Yeah, my recollection is we would use a clerk of the works. That's usually a term for like highway stuff, but no, it's also building stuff, because this building had a clerk of the works when it was built.
Yes.
So I think the major buildings and major road projects, maybe a dam project, would have a person like that.
And a building
it's not
is-
the GC, right? It's our person who's watching the GC.
And I feel like a building is a lot more complicated. It's just a lot more moving parts than a road or a sidewalk. And not to diminish from the challenges on that, but you have a lot of site work over there. You're going to have rock removal. You're going to have possibly a geothermal well drilled at the parking area. You're going to have to phase the building of the addition on the north end, and then the moving of certain things into the new addition so they can then retrofit and demolish the old part of the building, the inside at least.
So the question really isn't, do we need this position? We definitely need someone to fill this position for a project of this scale. The question is it Tim? And if, or not. But it's not, if we don't hire him, it's not like we don't hire anyone.
No, there are companies that do this specifically. Right. There's a company, Palumbo Construction, that does this that I used on my other job. I will tell you this, they're a lot more expensive.
This person will report to you?
Yes. It's already reporting to me in an informal way. I'm also using the city engineer for all the site civil work, so anything that's outside the building, I'm having John Russo keep an eye on. If you don't keep a good eye on these projects, you're going to get both budget and time overruns, and I want to do everything I can from day one to make sure that this is a well-oiled machine to get this done.
Would it disrupt the construction timeline to post this position?
Well, I wouldn't post the position.
Okay.
We're paying him as a contractor, so it would be an RFQ. I'm already in design, and I'm already using Tim.
So you're telling us we don't have an option?
No, you have an option. The question was whether it's disruptive. It's disruptive to the design process.
Okay.
Yeah, I can put it out, but I've got two other bids out right now and two other coming up. So, again, when I have somebody that I think is not only good and adequate, but kind of ideal for a position, I don't like to lose 2 months going after a consultant. The other thing is I don't want him to walk away. He's got lots of offers for work, both this year and next year, and he's kind of doing me a personal favor by not taking those jobs right now.
And he's presently drawing a pension from the city?
I believe so.
He's retired?
Yeah, but he's working. He retired after his 30 years, and like a lot of our workforce, then they go and they do a second career. So right now, he's doing construction inspection as a career.
Yeah, the way the retirement works is you can do private sector work. If you work for a state or municipal government, there's a dollar limit. Like building inspectors retire and then become the part-time building inspector of the next town over, and they get exactly the amount that is the maximum they can get.
I work in the city government too, so I see this all the time. If somebody has the retirement party and next week they come back as a consultant.
And it's fair because sometimes you're retiring early and you still got years left. So yeah.
I just think when you add up his personal knowledge of our fire operations and firematic principles overall, and then combined with the building, I mean, I don't know how you're going to find somebody better than Tim Dexter to work on this.
Maybe since it's borderline personnel, maybe we can finish the conversation in executive session tonight? We have an executive session, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and the only other thing I'll put out in the public is, remember I said that, I get straight answers from certain department heads. The important answers for this was, we had the 36,000 square foot firehouse being proposed, which was the round one firehouse. This is a 10,000 square foot firehouse. The straight answers came from Tim, even though obviously he pissed off the volunteer force by offering fair answers. So, and I have a lot of
And
respect
the only
for
other
that.
thing I'd add publicly is that our architect has a lot of respect for Tim and the work that he did at the city. And that means something to me because I have a lot of respect for this architect as well. I think you have one of the preeminent fire architects in the country.
Also, publicly, that to Dan's question, I would like to understand a little bit more about the scope of work and the estimated hours, and I would be open to, if there does seem to be a timing element that you're up against, Chris, to having that discussion. If you had the assumption that or the hope that we would vote on this next Tuesday, if we want to talk about the scope of hours at that we could consider voting on it I'd be open to consider voting on it on Tuesday if we, both in our executive session and with that public information shared, can have that.
And I think the scope and the hours change once we move from design and bidding to construction. I would say in this first phase, which gives me an opportunity to see how we work together as well. I haven't worked with Tim in almost 30 years. It's much less in terms of hours. So if I had to give you a general estimate, I would say it wouldn't go over 250 hours for the rest of the year. And I think that's a really high. And most of the scope in that regard is to review design documents and to help with investigations. Then there's a much more detailed scope that I would bring back to the council. So we could come back to the council prior to construction. We can assess how we did this year with the design services, and then have a very detailed scope, even a different contract if you want, for Tim, as we move into the construction inspection. And we do have a long list of what those items would be. So again, you can bifurcate this. The design is mostly him looking at the development of plans and helping with the coordination between the architect, the fire department, me, and any of the subcontractors that are coming in to do work, so that we make sure, like when they do the geotechnical borings, that they're in the right spots. And we've confirmed that before we pay. So we can talk more in executive session about any concerns.
That sounds okay. So next one is another agreement. This one is with WSP USA for construction inspection services for Mount Beacon and the Pocket Dam Rehab Project. Is that Chris or Drew?
That's me, but
start?
Drew can back me up if I forget anything. You have previously approved the construction of the Mount Beacon Dam Rehabilitation and the Pocket Dam Rehabilitation. We realized after that went through that the scope of work from the engineer had never been updated to include construction inspection. Because of the specialty of this, I don't believe I have anyone on staff or on past staff that I would want to have on a dam. So again, I think there's some advantage to having the company that designed this really specialty project overseeing the quality of the phasing and the signing off on the construction. As you'll notice, this is a more significant number. This is where you usually end up with construction inspection. It's usually about 10% of your construction. And this is a lot more intensive. Somebody being there basically during all of the 14 or 16 months of construction. And you'll see, we'll do this again when we go to construction on Fishkill and Teller Avenue. I'll have full-time. And we did this for those of you on council last year. HVEA, our engineering firm for the bump outs, served as construction inspector. And that's been very valuable because you'll see some of those sidewalks have subsequently cracked, and we're now bringing back the contractor to repair those.
So you said it wasn't included in the scope of work, so it wasn't included in the scope of work that went out for proposals as well? So none of the bids we received included a
So
construction
the
inspector?
WSP USA contract was only through design and bidding, and it had construction support, meaning that they would read plans and, they would help with interpretations of plans, but there was no inspector in it. And I caught that as I was looking through the contracts, and realized I need a full-time inspector up there.
Did any of the other bids have construction inspector? I want to make sure we're not running afoul
We
of New York
didn't,
State
you
law.
don't bid professional services.
So none of the ones we got for the original dam plan included a construction inspector. There wasn't someone who was $800,000 less who we said no to.
There was no bid for the engineers. The city has worked with WSP. WSP bought the engineering firm that we worked with for years on dams. So I wasn't here, it was years ago that I believe they hired WSP back in 2017. There was no bid, there was an RFP, a request for proposals. The current bids that we got, we're going with the low bidder, which is Doyle Constructors. So we awarded a bid on, you have to award a public works project or a purchase project to the lowest bidder, but professional services you can award to the most qualified. And I don't think they even gave a proposal for this phase because they were at a very early phase of design, and that contract's been updated multiple times. Drew, if I've missed anything, please.
No, Chris, that's pretty much it. The contract includes an amount not to exceed. They'll be billing at an hourly rate, which we've requested them to supply the hourly rate schedule.
Drew, we actually have that. That was on attachment A, so we can include that in the packet.
Perfect.
I realized that at 5:30 today.
Okay.
So, and I know this is new with the bidding and RFP, and it, again, I'm sorry if I'm ever going too fast on that, just go back and we'll cover it.
Yeah.
Have we budgeted for, is this an operating budget or a capital budget item?
It's in the capital program, so.
And we've already approved the part that would cover this. We just didn't put the contract out for it.
You have covered the design through bidding, and you have covered the construction. We are covering this by moving other money left over from the Fairview tank project. So we had extra capital dollars in the water fund that the finance director said could cover this amount.
And is that in the adjustments to the budget that are also on the agenda tonight, or that was done earlier?
No, she just did it
So that
administratively.
that doesn't need our oversight, that
we
kind
don't.
of change?
We don't believe so, because it was previously authorized for a water use in the water fund, and generally those are, like if you don't expend everything on, say, a tank, then it's fungible to other water supply programs. I wouldn't take it and buy a truck with it for the highway department, but, and sewer, we can, and the budget amendments you have are for the 2022 operating budget.
Sorry to.
No, it's,
Thank you
keep
for-
going, we're good.
So just so I understand, the Doyle construction contract that we approved was part of the 2019 capital plan, I believe. But anyway, a past capital plan.
A past capital plan, yes.
And this thing that you caught missing in the WSP plan was a contract that was approved before you and I were on council.
Yes.
Yes, okay, great.
Yeah, and I realize it looked, again, I don't think, our superintendent of water and sewers realized when he saw the contract, the difference between construction and support and construction inspection. I've done enough projects that when I read that, I thought, well, where's the other piece of this? But like that, unless you've done a lot of capital projects, some of the other projects he's done haven't needed a full-time construction inspector. And so after talking to him, I said, I think this would be valuable. We talked to the engineer, and they were willing to add the staffing to do that. And again, like, to me, it's partially a service and partially insurance, because when something goes wrong on a project, you can have incredible overruns. They did a jail years ago in Ulster County, and it had such severe overruns that it actually caused a turnover of the legislature, because we ended up with a 27% tax increase. My goal is to bring these projects in on time and under budget and do a quality job.
Thank you for explaining the particulars there.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I know it gets kind of crazy because you're like, well, we did this bid and we did this RFP. So, again, I want to make sure you understand it going forward. And ideally, I would have done this at the same time that you approved the Doyle contract. So I'm a little late.
Yeah, my impression, remembering a number of projects, is there's a couple ways it happens. Either the one who does design sticks around to do the oversight, or you pay for the design, then you're doing the construction. The only issue with construction is you get contractors. You don't have the oversight piece, right? And apparently you wanted the oversight piece past the design phase, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and I get it.
And the difference with the building and the firehouse building is, with architects, it's a little different. They're doing oversight. They're reviewing all of the submittals, like they have to submit drawings to show how they're going to meet the conditions in the plans. But it's also good for the city to have an agent who knows construction and particularly knows the thing that you're constructing. So I have somebody who knows firehouses, but dams is much more specialized.
Anything else, folks? We good? Okay, let's keep going. So item 6 is amendments to the 22 operating budget.
Yeah. So we have 5 amendments in your packet, and I'll walk you through them. And if you want to stop at each one and ask questions, maybe that's the way to do it, so we don't get too far ahead. This is the first set of amendments we've done to the budget that was adopted in December. Again, a budget is kind of a plan that gives where you think you're going to go, and then you make adjustments through the year. The first amendment is to the general fund budget. So we have 3 funds: the general fund, the water fund, and the sewer fund, and you're going to see adjustments to each of those. In the general fund, we had an expenditure for arbitrators for a union discipline matter that we needed to move $16,200 to. Fortunately, we saved on some attorney fees that would have been charged for in-rem properties as a result of a negotiation I did with the attorneys to put that under the monthly retainer that we do. So we were being charged on the side. What I tried to do is use our attorneys more strategically so that we could put most or all of those services in under the retainer. So that's our first one. Any questions? The second one, when someone retires or leaves service, we have to pay them out accruals. They get half of the value of their sick time up to a certain number of days. They get any of their personal time and vacation days. So we had 3 major retirements that we need to fund. The lines are for police, Alan Castro; fire, Mike Merritt; and DPW, Kilmer. And we had put those into contingency. When Susan prepares the budget, she does try to look ahead and think who is retiring and at least have a ballpark figure of, okay, we know this person has a ton of time that gets paid out, or this person has a minimal amount of time, as you'll see in one of the subsequent ones. So again, we had it in contingency. It still leaves us with quite a strong contingency fund of almost 440,000. So we're doing pretty well, and that's to cover 3 retirements.
Can I ask just a question about those, Chris? So it sounds like our general approach is that if we suspect someone is retiring, we put it in contingency, but we don't transfer it into other parts of our operating budget until they actually make it clear, I am retiring.
That's correct. Because we don't know for certain until they file. But when we sit down with the department heads and do the annual budgets, we say who's eligible to retire, who is maybe mentioned to you that they're going to retire, and then we try to build in enough that it doesn't knock us off kilter. And then if we don't need it, and we'll roll it over to the next year. The third one is for the sewer fund. And again, this was a much smaller payout. This was the retirement of Andy Goodall, and he didn't have as much time, so it's $9,938. It comes out of the sewer contingency, which is also well-funded. The fourth one is back to the general fund. You know that we've talked about previously that we have 6 open positions for patrol officers. Right now we have 14 patrol officers, and we really need it. We really need 20. So anytime people are going out to do training, they have injuries, and we've had an unexpectedly high number of injuries this year. One car accident, some tearing of muscles on another incident. They go on vacation. In one case, we have a military reservist who got called up, and we had to cover his shifts for several months. So all of those are on overtime. We're looking to increase the police overtime by $320,000 and the detective overtime by $36,000. We're proposing to cover that by shifting money that we didn't use from regular salaries. So the 6 people we didn't hire, we do have their salaries left to move over. We also are in the process of hiring a police assistant, which we would call a dispatcher. We have identified somebody through civil service that we can hire. I'll be bringing that hire to you in the next month. But we have half of that salary too. And then we do have some money in contingency. And Susan Tucker, our finance director, had put some money in contingency because we knew we were short-staffed and we knew there was no magic bullet out of that. Now, in executive session, you'll be meeting 2 new hires that we hope to bring on next week. So they'll be coming to council to talk to you. But that still leaves us with 4 openings. And by the time they go through the academy and field training, it'll be to the end of the year. So we're going to have issues with overtime continuing. And every time we have a special event and we have to have police on it, or every time we have a major incident and people either stay over their shift, it adds to that. The other factor that's been adding to it is when we offer overtime, a lot of the younger officers are not taking it as readily as the older officers who make a higher rate of pay. They don't want to work the extra hours, so we end up, our overtime ends up skewed towards the higher part of our pay scale. Any questions?
Is part of the staffing shortage, does that have to do with just our staffing minimums in general? Like if we had a lower staffing minimum, would we not have to pay as much overtime?
Yes, in theory, if you had a minimum shift of 3, it's basic math. You wouldn't need to fill as many slots. The problem is your past practice since the late 80s has been 4, which we codified in the last contract. And we did that to avoid a fight, to secure a contract with the PBA. And honestly, if you went below, again, this was before you were on council, but we talked about that minimum shift being consistent or low compared to all of the municipalities around us. There was only one municipality that has one shift that has less than that. So one of the ways I'm trying to have our patrol officer out on the street rather than at the desk is hiring that police dispatch person. But still, we need to have 4, because if you have a domestic incident that requires 2, we've had domestic incidents that have required all 4 officers on shift during the day, because you're dealing with the victim, the person who did the violence, and you can be dealing with children that then have to go somewhere in the family. So I think, yes, in theory, you could go lower than 4, but I think you'd also lose your police chief and probably most of your force.
Well, I mean, even if the staffing minimum was lower, it's just a minimum, right? We could still have more people on staff at a time, correct?
Yeah, the idea is if we had more staff, we'd have more flexibility. That way, when they're doing the calendars and they know somebody's going to be on vacation, they can fill that shift with regular time as opposed to overtime. You know,
Right,
we just don't have enough bodies to fill the shifts. I've been down 4 office, in addition to the 6 that we're missing, we've had 4 on late duty and military at the same time. And so, you know, almost every shift we have somebody on overtime.
Right, and as noted now, you know, it's always been a past practice, which means we were likely to lose to begin with, and now we also have a shift of minimum 4 in the fire department as well. So the evidence is, you know, not in our favor to try to do something else.
I mean, is it in our favor now to be paying all this overtime?
No,
I mean,
that's
it's
why-
not that it's our choice at this point because we're in a contract.
So long-term, if you want to change this dynamic, we
Gotta
need to
hire.
hire more police officers. The argument I made towards having a contract that was going to help attract people was I need to hire new people to come in and fill these shifts, and I need to retain the officers that are here. We lost an officer last year to Carmel, which pays $30,000 more a year for the same position. I know that it's frequent that I have municipalities in Westchester and Rockland trying to attract our officers to their municipalities, as I'm trying to now attract officers from other lower paying areas so that I can get a transfer in. So again, the idea over time was to try to rebuild the number of patrol officers so that you don't have to just go to overtime every time somebody's training or on vacation or on any kind of leave. And again, we have those 6 openings. I'm hoping to fill 2 next week, and then I'm hoping to have a transfer come in shortly after that. And we'll go through what we went through just to get to those 2 in executive session. And we don't really have a choice on this. Understand that if you said, okay, we're gonna unilaterally go to a minimum shift of 3, I would end up being pulled in front of the Public Employees Board, PERB, with a grievance against the city that we'd end up paying, you know, not only overtime, but a lot of attorney bills. And that's why I tried to have a fair contract that went through, have a good budget that went through, and we've set the stage to hire people. It's just, it takes time to hire people. We interviewed and did background checks on 6 or 7 people just to get 2. And those are extensive background checks that take a lot of time from our detectives. So.
Am I right, Chris, that the dispatcher that you're looking to hire would not count towards those minimums? The minimums are those who've gone through, who are the trained sworn officers?
And one of the reasons I was able to hire a second dispatcher this year is because in the contract negotiations, we had been precluded from hiring another one because they said, well, you're just going to try to count that towards the minimum. And we said, no, we're looking to get have more of the officers on the street and able to respond. So in exchange, part of setting that minimum 4 so that we didn't continue to fight about it, they gave us the ability to hire 1 or more dispatchers so that we could get that person off the desk. So the dispatcher we're hiring, we have a dispatcher on now Monday through Friday for the day shift, and this allows us to do the evening shift now. And then in future budgets, I may add a 3rd dispatcher for weekends. Again, there's no good answers here because, like, you know, we could start a battle with our police union, but based on what everybody else in the region does, based on past practice, based on safety concerns, and I said this during the contract negotiations last year and the subsequent conversations here, you're going to just end up spending more in legal cost, and you're going to be back where you are. I've been able to build a strong relationship with this police department to try to keep moving them in the right direction, which is it's not growing them, but it's getting them back to sufficient staffing that we're not just, you know, going to overtime on almost every shift.
Yeah, is there information from last year and maybe the year before of how much the council had to approve overtime charges for the police department, just to get a sense of this and the perspective of where we are and where we're going?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Yes, we can get that, and I'll send that around by email after I get it from Sue. We're on track to hit the same amount of overtime that we did last year, basically. And we had put money in contingency. I didn't want to just put it in overtime because I don't want to make the assumption we're just going to use it. We've been trying to hire new officers. You've hired, I think, 2 since your council has been seated. I think you hired Justin and 1 other. And again, what we're doing here is we're trying to project out. We haven't spent this money, but based on where we are right now, almost mid-year, this is where Sue thinks we're going to be by the end of the year. And it's right around last year, but we'll get you the numbers from 2021.
And one question I have maybe for the chief is that I don't know how police hiring works, but I'm wondering if having a non-sworn additional staff member could help with some of the hiring needs, if there is sort of a way that could be helped that way to help. I have no idea how. I know there are periods where you can hire and you can't hire.
We're doing an executive session in which you can talk to the chief tonight.
I'd be curious to know if he has thoughts about ways that we could maybe spend money towards that to help address one issue, and just what are our options to try to address the hundreds of thousands of dollars in overtime that we're having to approve.
I mean, this is kind of a simple math problem. You have X amount of slots that you have to fill, and when 4 people are on light duty and can't fill those, 1 is on reserve, you have less people to choose from, and they can only do so many slots a week before they go into overtime.
So, you know, the easy way to think about it is if you hire someone, you pay their salary. If you use an overtime, it's about 50% more. You can see it in the numbers right here, right? Because you'll save on, I didn't have to hire the person. Yeah, but you got to pay the overtime, which is time and a half. Surprise. Right?
And
so that's
certain,
roughly the number.
There are certain things where, like, we're doing films again, and some of the films require, like, we have one coming up this week that's going to require 2 officers on overtime, and we are charging the highest, the rate of the highest paid officer plus fringe benefit plus a little bit for the overhead for the equipment, and we're charging that for every officer that goes there. So I make up a little bit of this overtime when I charge for-profit entities for police assistance that they request. So some of this I'll make up through the films, which we did last year. Any other questions? We have one more to go through. So the sewer budget, we have an odor control filter that has failed and needs replacing, and I don't want to wait till next year to do this. Summer is coming, and we do have money in the contingency fund to move over. So this is, I I think money well
By
spent.
all means, please move ahead.
And that's all I have. So we would bring those to you next week for approval, and I will try to get the numbers from the 2021 police overtime to see what the actuals were. And in fact, I might be able to do that while we're discussing the next one.
For the odor control, I'm all for spending that money. I just wanted to clarify why it wasn't in the capital budget, or if where the decision is. Is it not enough, the right amount of money to be it's a repair, so we're not paying for an object, we're paying for a service?
It could go in the capital budget, because it does have a life of more than 5 years. It should have a life of more than 5 years. I would actually probably put this in the operating budget. Like, we have 2 of these odor control systems, and you probably get, I can make it last 5 years, but I probably don't want to make it last 5 years. So I'm actually thinking about putting them in the budget, so we replace 1 each year.
Got it.
Yeah.
And it was at a sudden expense. It was an unexpected breakdown, right?
Yeah, it was just like, oh, wow, we're getting some odor problems. We don't usually have odor problems. And when the engineer looked into it, they figured one of the covered tanks, the unit needed to be recharged and redone.
Which building is it?
One of the covered ones. I don't know yeah. It's not the headworks, because I thought it was the headworks, but it's...
So it's the one that you don't
and
want.
it's the one that, the one we're replacing is the one that's closest to residents.
Yeah, okay.
So,
Thanks.
yeah. Okay, so that's budget amendments.
All right. 2 left, and then an executive session. So one is amendments to the code on traffic and safety. Ben, you've got this?
Yes, Mayor. Good evening, Council. I'll try and go through this relatively quickly. This is a combination of a few months of traffic safety committee meeting recommendations put together all at once for efficiency, and I'll quickly go through what they're recommending, and you are at liberty to do with what you wish with that. So I'll share my screen so everyone can see it. And so the first is similar to the last round of stop signs that we did. We have a couple stop signs that are in the ground and on the streets, but not actually in the code. So along Cannon Street, we did one last go around. I believe it was at Lincoln and Cannon, but don't quote me on that. There's 2 others along Cannon Street entering onto Cannon that are also not in the code, so we wanted to remedy that. That's the first recommendation. The second is to add a new stop sign that's not in the ground at Bank Street at the intersection of Tompkins to help combat, I believe, some concerns about people using Bank as a throughfare from the train station to kind of remedy some safety concerns there. And feel free to stop me as we go if you have any questions. The third is to extend an existing school zone to further go down along Leonard Street and Liberty Street to reflect that there is a school at St. Joachim's and to provide a little bit more protection over there for students. And there is an existing school zone sign there, but that would be out of line with what the code reflects. I believe the code reflects that the school zone ends at Grove off Liberty. So the Traffic Safety Committee is recommending to extend this. Fourth, to address some parking concerns along at this intersection, specifically with regards to emergency vehicle access. There are some concerns that right now with the 30-foot no parking zone around this intersection, there are some concerns about some of the fire safety vehicles being able to make this turn. So the committee is recommending in all directions extending to 50 feet to allow the larger fire safety vehicles to make that turn and have better access to this community area. And finally, the committee is recommending extending no parking along one side of East Main. Currently, it already exists at East Main past Pocket, but they wanted to extend it down to William as well. Due to hiker traffic, there's been a lot of congestion on parking on both sides of East Main in this area, and it's a relatively narrow street, which causes some concerns about getting through, safety vehicles, but just also pedestrian vehicles as well. So that is the recommendations from the committee. I'm the secretary to that committee. I'm not a voting member, but I'm happy to try and answer any questions that you might have, if you have any.
I have two things, Ben, if it's okay. On this last one about Pocket Road, this doesn't mean that we're going to be dropping giant blocks of concrete up and down East Main like we did with Pocket Road, right? There'll just be signage saying no parking?
So the committee is just recommending the signage. Obviously, the committee is not putting any of this into practice themselves. They're an advisory committee. It would be the highway department would be the ones putting these in the ground. I'm not familiar with the blocks of concrete that you're referring to.
Yeah, we're not going to put any more blocks of concrete.
No.
They're big.
They are big.
So there you go.
The other thing I had was at the intersection of Washington and East Main, where we are painting new crosswalks next to Barb's Butchery.
We're repainting existing crosswalks.
Repainting existing ones, thank you. There was a recommendation on May 26th from the Traffic Safety Committee that there would be, there was a conclusion that they reached that there would be a crosswalk ahead sign to be installed along East Main past Russell.
So that wouldn't be in the code, is my understanding.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So there's some signs don't get added to.
No, that'll just be added to the to-do list for
Got it.
DPW.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
So like
Advisory
drive
signs aren't
Yep.
required.
Things like that don't need to be in the code.
Okay, thank you.
No
But
problem.
thanks for
Any
the
other
heads up
questions?
on that.
And for at the intersection of West Church and Cross Street, I'm assuming that the folks who live within 50 feet of that intersection, this doesn't present a parking issue for their households, if they're used to parking in front of their own houses?
I'm not familiar with their parking situations, whether or not they use their driveways, if they have driveways. Was not something that was specifically addressed as a concern by the committee, but it could be something that comes up at the public hearing, and you guys would need to consider that.
Yeah, you are going to have a public hearing on these that we set
Right.
for next Tuesday.
Right.
So if anybody has a concern about that, please tell us now.
Well, just a correction, Chris, I think the public hearing will be set next Tuesday for another date. We won't have the public hearing next Tuesday.
Thank you.
Yes. But yes, those are the types of things that would be considered further at these hearings.
Thanks.
I believe there's a parking lot on Cross Street, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, we have a public lot
Yeah.
right off of Main.
You ready to go to an easement on Bettina Place?
Just related to Pocket Road, not to do with these stop signs, I think, Chris, you mentioned there was the possibility of adding parking at the end of Pocket Road, but that would depend on what happened with the water tank or water facility that's currently
Yes.
being looked at in there.
Yes, so as part of, we're going to need to replace that water tank in the next 2 to 3 years. It's in the capital program that's been proposed. We would build the new tank up the hill a little bit from the existing tank, while leaving that tank online. Once the new tank is online and we decommission the old tank, I've spoken to our engineer and our superintendent about trying to carve out some number of spaces there, while still being compliant with the security rules for water supply. So we would put up probably very strong barriers between any infrastructure that we have and the parking area. But I'm hoping we can carve out some of the spots that we took away on Pocket Road and put them in a discrete parking lot.
And we own, as the city, we own all that land? It's not owned by
Yes.
Scenic Hudson?
No, we own that.
Great.
I know that some hikers who've been going up Pocket Road have been there's a bunch of visual cues for them now that they're not welcome there. I think like the big concrete blocks and lack of parking and stuff. And so people are starting to go into the hiking apps and marking it as private access, that the public doesn't have access to the pocket road entrance to the mountain. So that's just something that's been raised to me by hikers.
Yeah, and that was the decision of the prior council to preclude parking on Pocket Road, and it had to do with, we had maybe two, if you had little cars, maybe 3 spaces up there, and those would get filled, and then the parking queue would just go right down the hill to the point where we couldn't get vehicles in to do maintenance at the water facility there.
So 2 things there. One is when I voted to do away with parking on Pocket Road, I didn't know we were taking away those 4 parking spots that I thought would be left there to deal with the parking. I thought we were getting rid of the on-street parking. And also I didn't know about those giant concrete blocks were going to be dropped everywhere. What was eventually done was not what I envisioned when I was voting yes on that.
So I wasn't here for that vote, and I'm glad to rethink this, and I think doing the tank offers us a chance to do that. I wouldn't necessarily want to take, I don't like the concrete blocks, but they are certainly effective in making sure that people don't park there. The signs, we don't always work, as evidenced by the complaints that all of us see from Mountain Lane and East Main Street, Mountain Avenue and East Main Street. Since it was kind of off-road, again, they're not the prettiest blocks, but maybe landscape boulders we'll do next time.
Potted trees.
Potted trees, yes. Something heavy and that damages your car when you run into it.
Okay.
Melia Bettina.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you, Ben.
Great job, Ben.
Thanks. Yeah, and last item, we got an easement on Bettina Place. Drew, you want to tell us what it is?
Drew?
Sure. So there is a potential purchaser for Melio Bettina Place. They've come across a problem where there is an encroachment on city-owned property. The city owns the parking lot next to the Melio Bettina Place that's up for sale. There is a 0.5-foot encroachment that runs 35.26 feet in length. So to address this, going forward, we're thinking about doing a permanent easement subject to approval by the city council. What would happen next if the city council is interested in moving this forward, the potential purchaser would then do a meets and bounds description of that exact easement area, which would be the encroachment. We would run it by the town assessor to see how much that area of land is worth, to see how much they would have to pay, and then we'd move forward with approving the permanent easement, and then they can, not have to worry about the encroachment anymore.
And the other alternative we had, again, this is 6 inches. They're building 6 inches over the line.
Well, it's already built, too.
It's already built.
It's already there.
But the other alternative would be to do a lot line revision where we sell them the land, but then we lose the necessary frontage for the lot that we own, which at some point could be used for something else. So a permanent easement gives us the most latitude not to lose the ability to utilize our property. And we have sewer and water easements under that property as well. We've confirmed that the existing building doesn't interfere with any of those easements.
That's correct. And just follow up to Chris's statement, if we did a lot line adjustment, it would make the width of, because that would shift the side yard property line. That would make the lot non-conforming with respect to width. The minimum lot requirement for this area is 50 feet. It is currently 50 feet. If you move the lot, 0.6 to accommodate this encroachment, you'd be making the width non-conforming, which is not permitted by the code. So the permanent easement is just another alternative, that's not the lot line adjustment.
So they were building right up to the edge of their property? Aren't there setbacks?
No, they already built. This happened a long time ago. It's
like
been
100 years ago.
Oh, 100 years
It's
ago.
very
Okay, I
old
thought they
house.
just did it. Okay.
Yeah, no. It has not been just it was not just done, it was done a long time ago. Now someone new is coming in to purchase the property, and, they have to deal with this encroachment.
Yeah, so it sounds like this was discovered because they're trying to sell, and
Yes.
and this was how they realized that. And we're involved because it happens to be next to city property.
That's exactly correct.
Bingo.
This area was known as the cheese factory site.
Yes. What is that parking for? Is that for the houses on North Cedar that traditionally were, or for the old factory?
We're trying to determine certain other questions that have been raised. And I will get back to you as soon as I have some idea how all of that came to be, and why we plow it.
Oh, we plow it too.
We do plow it, yes. So it's interesting, when people, park their buildings 6 inch over, we learn a lot of things about those adjoining lots. So again, lots of things have happened over the years that never were fully codified, and we will clean up all these other circumstances.
I have a question.
That was a good question, though.
Yes, I've been curious about this lot and this property for a little while. So very curious to hear what you learn.
Me too.
About what's going on there. But this is sort of like maybe a zoning 101 question on my part. But if they decided to build a new building, they would then have to conform to current zoning and build the building at a setback. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
The exception is if you had a fire or something and you rebuild, I think you could rebuild on the existing footprint if it's not beyond a certain level. Is that right, Drew?
That's correct. It's a 50%. I'm going to say 50%, but I'd have to confirm. But it's a percentage. So if it's not damaged and you're rebuilding up to 50%, then you hold on to the existing legal non-conforming status of that property, and you can rebuild it.
Yes.
I'm curious just because just looking at it, that porch looks like it might need to be rebuilt anyway, but I'm not actually a building expert, so I don't know.
Yeah, so they'd be, if it was just the porch alone, that would be okay to rebuild,
Yeah.
If it's in the exact same footprint and they're not increasing it in any way, because it would continue the existing non-conforming.
And this has gone through successive sales over the years, and this is the first buyer that caught, it's six inches over the line. But now that it's known, it has to be disclosed by the real estate agent as well.
And the potential purchaser has been, trying to work with us to come up with a way to resolve it, so.
So if you're amenable to doing this, we would, again, figure out what the value is, $50 or $150. They would pay for all filing fees for the easement would be recorded with the city clerk's office, and then we would vote on that property transfer.
Yep, once the easement is complete.
And what kind of easement is this? Is this called an encroachment easement, or?
We just, it's a general term, a permanent easement.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right, it's a use easement, Drew?
Yeah, we would just call it, it would probably partially be an access easement as well, but we would title it just probably permanent easement.
Yeah. And then we'll figure out the other mysteries surrounding that lot.
Right, and there's an alleyway in the back. It's been very interesting to look at the surveys, the original, not just the survey that's in the packet, but the maps available on Dutchess County Parcel Access. There's a couple easements along the little alleyway that's located both behind this parcel and behind the parking lot. So there's a lot going on here.
And if we can't figure it out, we can figure it out by not plowing it and seeing who calls us. So I have a default plan B in case. All
right.
Executive session.
So I'll entertain a motion to go in executive session to discuss personnel matters.
motion to go into executive session to discuss personnel matters, and we will, oh gosh, what is it? And
Oh, you're close.
Keep going.
You got this.
And we will not be discussing any other business after executive session.
Perfect.
Nailed
All right. Second, all right, and then all in favor?
Aye.
All right,
Aye.
good night all.
All right. And we just let the chief know he's coming up with, so you have about 5 minutes if you want to take